He sat alone in a collapsed trench, bleeding from the shoulder, staring at his last bullet, not at the enemy, but at himself. The static on the radio had long gone silent, the sky above turning from smoke gray to pitch black. Reinforcements were hours overdue, if they were coming at all. And then, just as he lifted the barrel under his chin, a sound. Boots, voices. But were they his own? The radio crackled once, then went dead. What was supposed to be a routine 48-hour recon operation had dissolved into a nightmare within a matter of hours. Thick jungle, foreign soil, and no margin for error. From the moment the team was dropped, something had felt off. The silence was too perfect, the birds too quiet, and the air held a tension that no one could name but everyone could feel. It wasn't long before that tension broke. The first explosion hit just after nightfall. A hidden IED buried along a supposedly cleared path, to team members gone in seconds. No screams, just a flash of light, and the sudden absence of movement. The rest scattered. Standard protocol, regroup at Point Echo. But the comms were already failing. Static chewed through every message, voices barely intelligible over the screeching white noise. By the time the sun rose, only four remained. By the time it set again, he was alone. The forest closed in like a noose. Every step crackled. Every breath felt stolen. The enemy wasn't loud. They didn't shout orders or march information. They were ghosts, shadows in the trees, the kind of fighters who didn't make mistakes and never left bodies behind. One of the fallen team members had dragged himself under a fallen log. Still breathing by the time he was found again, only the helmet remained. He kept moving until moving became impossible. His right shoulder had taken a piece of shrapnel deep enough to hurt like hell, but not enough to kill him. That was a mercy he'd learned to resent. Blood loss was steady. Pain blurred his vision. Water ran out faster than rations, and his position, somewhere deep in enemy territory. With no working GPS, no flares, and a broken antenna on the long-range radio, he found shelter inside a half-collapsed trench, likely from a battle long past. Broken helmets and rusted rifles lay scattered in the mud, the ghosts of another war. That's where he stayed. He tried the radio again, just in case. Static. More static. A brief voice maybe, then silence. It didn't matter. He knew no one was coming. Not anymore. Time fractured. He didn't sleep so much as blink and find the sun had shifted. Hunger became a dull ache. Thirst became dangerous. Twice he saw movement figures through the trees, but neither approached. Maybe they were scouts. Maybe hallucinations. He stopped trying to tell the difference. And the dreams, they were the worst part. In them, his team was alive, laughing, walking toward him through the fog. One of them even spoke, reaching a hand out. "You're almost there," he'd said. Then the hand would close around his neck, and he'd wake up choking on dirt and blood. By day 4, the wound had turned, infected, swollen. His arm had stopped responding completely. He fashioned a sling out of his torn vest and kept the rifle close. It felt like a joke, 9 bullets left and nowhere to fire them. By nightfall, 2 more were gone. He didn't even remember shooting. Just darkness and a faint scream somewhere in the distance. Real or imagined, he'd never know. But the moment that would haunt him forever came on the morning of the 5th day. That's when he counted the rounds again. 8, 7, 6, 4, 3, 2, 1. 1 bullet left. He stared at it longer than he cared to admit. Polished brass, worn ridges. The same as any other, except this one wasn't for the enemy. He wasn't even sure if they were still nearby. Maybe they'd moved on. Maybe they were watching, amused, waiting for nature to finish the job. No, this last bullet wasn't for them. It was for him. There was no panic, no sobbing. Just a cold stillness, a clarity that only absolute isolation can bring. He placed the bullet in the chamber slowly, deliberately. Checked it, rechecked it, sat back against the trench wall, the muzzle cold against his skin. He whispered his team's names, whispered a few last words to a god he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. And then a sound. Not loud, not dramatic, just different, a rhythm. Footsteps, not boots stomping like the enemy. Not a wild animal scurrying in the underbrush. These steps were careful, methodical. And then a voice so faint he thought it might be in his head. "Do you copy?" The rifle dropped from his chin. He blinked hard. The voice came again, clearer this time, closer. "Repeat, Alpha 4, do you copy?" He scrambled for the radio. Static. Then miracle something else. "Hold tight. We've got your signal. Extraction inbound." He didn't believe it at first. Didn't move. Just stared at the bullet he never fired, resting now in the dirt, useless. His hand trembled not from fear, but from the shock of what he had almost done. Reinforcements were coming, and he was still alive. He'd always believed he'd go out fighting, screaming through the chaos, weapon blazing, in a final act of defiance. Not like this, not crawling in the mud, half blind from blood loss, and counting down his last bullet like it was a lifeline. The irony wasn't lost on him. A trained soldier, someone who had survived countless missions behind enemy lines, was about to be taken out not by gunfire or ambush, but by silence. The infection had spread further up his arm by the 6th day. His entire side felt like it was on fire. Breathing became a conscious effort. He could no longer feel his fingers, and even holding the rifle required focus he didn't have. He stopped trying to ration food. The last protein bar had been reduced to wet crumbs he barely swallowed. His throat too dry to manage more. He used to count the days. Now he counted the breaths. Then came the hour that broke something inside him. It began with a sound, distant, sharp. A rifle cracked a twig. His hand reflexively reached for the gun. He waited, ears straining. Nothing followed. But his body didn't relax. Sweat pooled in his collar. The kind of sweat that meant danger was near, the type he'd learned to trust more than intel. His eyes scanned the tree line. He thought he saw a figure tall, deliberate, but then it vanished. Maybe it was a shadow, maybe a sniper. He pressed his back to the earth and didn't move. Minutes stretched, then hours. He didn't dare breathe. Too loud. His grip on the rifle tightened. He could feel his pulse in his temples. His lips cracked from thirst, but he dared not sip. That one shape had unraveled the last thread of his sanity. He realized that no matter how good he was, no matter how many tricks he knew, he couldn't outrun the math. He was dying. Slowly, pathetically, and alone when the sun dipped behind the horizon again, plunging the forest into shadow. The cold took over. It got worse at night. Temperatures dropped. He shivered uncontrollably, every muscle cramping from fatigue. Sleep became a taunting enemy. Whenever he closed his eyes, the jungle whispered. Branches snapped in slow rhythm. Were they moving toward him, or were the sounds just memories of his team, lost in the chaos? He whispered their names again. One by one. Martinez, who always carried extra ammo just in case. Torres, who cracked jokes at the worst times. And Price, his closest friend, his brother in arms. He hadn't seen what happened to Price. One moment, they were clearing a ridge together. The next, gunfire, then silence. He never found the body. That not knowing dug deeper than any shrapnel. He reached for the rifle with his one good hand. Only one bullet remained. He held it for a long time. It was strangely beautiful. The brass casing gleamed in the moonlight. He turned it between his fingers, feeling its weight. So small, and yet so final. It wasn't fear that guided him. Not really. It was resignation. He had been trained to endure, to escape, to overcome. But this wasn't a war zone anymore. It was a slow-motion graveyard. His thumb hovered over the chamber. A gentle slide, a soft click. He'd done it 1,000 times in training. But this wasn't training. This time, there was no debrief, no metal, no flag-draped coffin. Just dirt, silence, and the weight of choosing how it would end. He placed the barrel under his chin, took a breath. Everything slowed. His thoughts became clearer than they had in days. He thought of home, not as it was, but as it had existed in his last letter. Crisp air, his sister's laugh, the smell of cinnamon bread cooling on the windowsill. He pictured his father's hand on his shoulder, proud but distant. Then the face of a woman, one he'd barely had time to know, whose voice still lived in voicemails he hadn't deleted. He whispered, "I'm sorry." Whether it was to her, to himself, or to no one, he didn't know. He closed his eyes. Then they cracked, louder than before. Closer. A voice followed. Not a whisper, Not a hallucination, a real voice. Hold. Position. Say again. Hold your position. His eyes snapped open. Footsteps, more than one. Rustling through brush. He lowered the rifle. Breath caught in his throat. Alpha 4. If you can hear us, give a signal. Smoke, flare, anything. He fumbled with the pouch clipped to his vest. His hands moved on instinct. Adrenaline overriding exhaustion. No flare, no beacon. But he had the mirror. The old polished shard Martinez had given him as a joke. He angled it to catch the moonlight. He flashed it toward the sound. No response. Then, we see you. Figures emerged from the trees. Camo fatigues, US patches, real boots. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. His hand released the rifle. It fell into the mud beside him. The last bullet lay unused. One of the rescuers knelt beside him. We've got you, brother. You're going home. He didn't cry, not then. But something inside shattered, not from pain, but from the sudden, shocking realization. He hadn't died, and in the end, the only bullet he'd truly needed was the one he never fired. They almost didn't see the signal, just a flicker of reflected moonlight off something metallic. Probably nothing, they thought at first. A scrap of debris, a trick of the forest. But the team's lead, a grizzled operative named Rains, had been in the field too long to ignore gut instincts. He ordered them to halt, and they scanned the trees again. That's when they saw it, 2 flashes, then 3. Deliberate. Human. Someone was alive out there. The covert unit wasn't even supposed to be in that sector. Their mission had diverted due to bad intel, and they'd only ended up near the ridge because one of their drones had picked up a scrambled field beacon frequency earlier that day. Most assumed it was just a malfunction, but Rains had insisted they investigate before moving on. Now, staring at those flashing lights, no one was questioning him anymore. They moved fast, quiet, standard leapfrog formation, to scouts forward. The forest was thick, but the flashes led them to a collapsed trench, ancient by the looks of it, nearly buried under roots and moss. A faint moan rose from inside. The man didn't look human at first, more like a shadow draped in rags, skin caked in dirt and dried blood. One arm was limp and blackened with infection. His lips were cracked, and his eyes were sunken like someone who hadn't seen daylight in a decade. But he was alive. Barely. The medic dropped beside him, already unpacking a field for kit. The soldier flinched as they touched his arm, muttering something incoherent, rifle still resting near his leg, and beside it, a single bullet, half buried in the mud. The medic glanced at it, then at Rains. Neither said a word, but they understood. He had come within seconds of ending it. They radioed for medevac, but the jungle made landing a nightmare. The team had to extract him by foot, navigating hostile ground and thinning air, while every second counted. He drifted in and out of consciousness, barely able to speak. But his grip on the stretcher's side never loosened. Somewhere deep in his mind, he knew this was real, that help had come, that the war wasn't over, at least, not for him. It took them over 3 hours to reach the secondary LZ. During that time, they engaged into brief firefights with enemy scouts likely from the same force that had ambushed his teen days. Earlier, the rescuers fought hard and fast, aware that their fragile cargo couldn't survive another delay. When the chopper finally appeared overhead, blades slicing through the trees, it felt like a second miracle. They loaded him quickly. As the bird lifted off, the forest vanished beneath them in a blur. Inside, the soldier lay still, eyes fixed. On the ceiling, the medic kept talking to him, giving him water, checking vitals. But he didn't respond much. Not until someone mentioned a name, Price. His eyes twitched. He tried to speak but managed only a whisper. The name haunted him. Even now, suspended between survival and grief, he wanted to ask if they'd found his friend's body, if anyone else had made it out. But he lacked the strength. Back at the forward operating base, the debriefs were brief. He was rushed into surgery to treat the infection and remove the shrapnel. He spent 6 days unconscious. When he finally woke, the first thing he asked wasn't where he was or who had saved him. It was, did I use it? The nurse didn't understand, But he did. He was asking about the bullet. They'd kept it, cleaned it, sealed it in a clear case, and left it on the small metal table beside his cot. A quiet reminder, a testament to how close he'd come, not as a trophy, but as truth. He stayed in recovery for weeks. There were nightmares often. He'd wake up and sweat, gasping for air, thinking he was still buried in that trench. He refused therapy at first, then reluctantly began to talk, not about the war, but about the silence, the moment where he felt time bend, the second when ending his life had felt more logical than holding on. He didn't dramatize it, didn't cry when he spoke. He simply told it as it was. He had prepared to die, and then something unexpected happened. Reinforcements came. He would later learn that the beacon he thought broken had briefly pulsed out one short-range burst before shutting down. Just one, just enough. A coincidence, a fluke, or maybe something else, something bigger than luck. Months passed before he was cleared for return. He didn't go back into the field right away. They gave him the option to retire, take an honorable discharge, walk away from the war with a quiet thank you and a file full of commendations. But he didn't take it. Not yet. Instead, he began speaking to younger soldiers, not in lectures or formal classes, but in quiet corners of the barracks, during downtime or mess hall conversations. He talked about the jungle, about survival, and about the bullet. Always the bullet, the one he didn't fire. He carried that casing in his pocket now, not as a reminder of failure, but of choice, of hesitation, of what can happen when you give yourself just one more second. That second can mean everything. Sometimes, he still sat alone in the dark, holding it, thinking about the trench, the silence, the voice on the radio. The bullet had been meant for him, but fate, or maybe mercy, had other plans. Reinforcements had arrived, and the war, as unforgiving as it was, hadn't taken him that day. It had spared him, just long enough to come back different.